I've been thinking a bit about books the last couple of days. This is partly prompted by Professor Anton's videos, a couple of videos he's made recently talking about books and what he refers to as book culture, and how that might be seen to interface with YouTube culture. Sorry if I'm sniffing, I've got a bit of a cold. Yeah, and books. He's set himself quite a challenge there, I think, trying to argue the case for the book within YouTube. It does feel a little bit at times like trying to argue the case for music hall on television. You know, it has that kind of a ring to it. But I think there's a lot of other things going on there, and there's a lot of stuff going on to do with authority, legitimization of knowledge, processes by which things achieve relevancy and legitimacy generally. All kinds of stuff to do with elitism. There's a lot of traffic and static in the message, unfortunately. But for me, at least, the central message is not message really. The central theme is around books. And I think there is something interesting about books. I suppose I'm partly prompted by Gary's Do Not Gods response to Professor Anton. One of the, I think he made a couple of videos, but in one of them he said, it's really fucking typical Gary, outrageous comment about how you only ever need to read 12 books. 12 books, that's all you need. Great. I just wondered why 12 came from. You know, why is it 12 books that you need? And why, you know, how would those books get chosen? What would those books consist of? What order would you read them in? When you've read the 12, do you know everything, or are they starting? You know, why the 12? I mean, is it 12 like for one of the months of the year, like even the Reader's Digest book club, or is it 12 because, I don't know, one for each star sign, or is it one for each apostle? Why 12? Or is it because it's 12 is more than 10, you're more than you can count in your hand, therefore a kind of symbolic of infinity? I don't know, 12. But there's other numbers floating around, I think. There's a great film, The Time Machine. It's a film version of H.G. Wells' story, The Time Machine, made in the 1960s. Great film it is. Very of its time. And in that, the kind of hero, the protagonist, builds a time machine sometime in the late 19th century, flies into the distant future, and basically screws up what is a perfectly balanced, sustainable, ecological society, and introduces violence and all kinds of things into that society, although he's supposed to be the hero. He does all that, and of course falls in love with this beautiful blonde girl. And the closing scene, or one of the closing scenes, is when he flies back in his time machine to his study in the 19th century, and then flies back forward again, and his friends, who've been kind of waiting for him in the 19th century, go into his study and find the traces of his time machine and how he's been and then gone back into the future. But they notice that he's taken 5 books out of his bookshelves, 5 books, but they don't know which ones they are. And one of his friends, a Scottish guy, says, "Which ones would you take?" Something like that, enigmatically. So something about this set of books which are really important, which for whoever, Rod Taylor, I think it is, in that film, he took to the future and presumably made things even worse than he'd already made them. I think you also find that idea of the limited number of completely relevant books in, well, there's a radio show in Britain actually called Desert Island Discs on Radio 4, and the idea is you get some celebrity or some business person, some public figure, and they say what their 8 favourite musical tracks are, and they're always interesting, and they give a little bit of background history on that, with the idea being that these are the pieces of music that you would take with you onto a desert island. But what you're also allowed to take is a book. Now you're already given the Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare. I guess they included those because so many people started choosing them that they thought of just giving them anyway. But then you have to pick a third one. So again, in that show, there's this idea that there are 3 books. 2, 2. Shakespeare, Bible, we've got that. And then this other book that marks you out as slightly different. 2 universal books for all of mankind, and then one that marks you out as something a bit different, and you can read for all eternity on your desert island. Come on, folks, let's go this way. There's also an episode of Star Trek, I seem to remember, I might be completely wrong on this, an episode of Star Trek, it's a really crap episode actually, it's the old original series, where the Starship Enterprise goes to this planet I don't know how exactly, but the people who live in this planet, who are called something like the Lotians, or the Lotian... No, I can't get it. They go to this planet, and these people have, somehow, a few centuries earlier, they came across this book called something like Gangs of Chicago in the 1920s. And they've rebuilt the planetary society in the shape of Gangs of Chicago in the 1920s. So everybody's running around dressed like Al Capone and Legs Diamond and all that lot. It's a crappy episode, but very entertaining, because of course the Star Trek crew have to join in the game, and it gives them opportunity to run around and fire those strange looking machine guns carrying violin cases. But again, you got this idea of the book. What happens at the end of that, I think, although I may be wrong here, is that James T. Kirk substitutes the book that they've been living by up to this point with some other book. But I don't think he says which book it is. I think he leaves them with a new book to live by that isn't quite so violent. But as I say, I don't think they say which one it is. But again, you got this idea of the book. Of course, we're flying really close to scripture here, and the idea that the book is contains all human wisdom, and I think that's what's going on with that Star Trek episode, if I'm honest. You also get this idea of one book. There's two other one books actually. This other idea of one book is in this Borges short story. I love Borges short stories. He's fucking brilliant, Argentinian writer, and he did a story called The Library at Babylon, and it's about this infinite library. I've probably talked about this before because it's just great. It's about this infinite library in which every single possible combination of letters and characters have been turned into books. So it contains every possible combination of every possible alphabet put into book form and scattered across this huge, huge library. And of course it's completely useless, because 99.999 recurring percent of these books are just nonsense. There's no system by which you can find the ones that are valuable, or they've got actually information there at all. Every book that's got a piece of information has got a book next to it which contradicts it and refutes it. So all the knowledge is there in every possible form, but completely unusable. The infinitude of books. But one of the myths that runs through the library is that there's supposed to be a kind of mythical centre to it. No one's ever found the centre of this library, but there's a mythical centre to it, in which there is the one book. And this one book at this supposed centre of the library is perfectly circular. I think he says perfectly circular, with an infinite number of infinitely thin pages arranged in like a Rolodex, is how I imagine it. So that's a really nice idea of one book. But it's kind of vaguely scriptural, I think. Slightly different, but yeah, I like that. The other one book I've got, and I think this is probably bogus actually. Somebody told me this a few years ago, and I think it's wrong, to be honest. But someone told me that within Buddhism, the Buddhist literature, a lot of the writings in the Pali Canon, which is like 6,000 pieces of writing that makes up the sum total of knowledge at that time, I guess, something like that, 6,000 books. But at a certain point, someone decided to condense that down into a single book, which became what's now called the Diamond Sutra. And as I say, I think this is wrong, but I like the idea of it anyway. So this 6,000 books was compressed down into this one book of about 20,000 words, which is quite a small book, called the Diamond Sutra. But not compressed in the way that dictionaries are compressed, but compressed in the way that poems are compressed. So all of the complex language is shrunken down using poetic metaphor and allusion and figuration and all that allegory, all those kind of tropes that you get in poetry. So all those books become one book, and then later on, again, this is probably spurious, someone decided that the Diamond Sutra was too long, 20,000 pages, who's got time, 20,000 words, who's got the time to read that? And so someone went down and compressed that, and that became the Heart Sutra, which I think is just like 20 paragraphs. It's very short. I mean, many people I know have memorised the Heart Sutra. It's quite easy. But again, it's a compression that's poetic, not a compression like a précis or a summary or a series of notes or a series of bullet points. It's not that kind of a compression. It's a compression which makes full use of poetic strategies of figuration and metaphor and all those things. And if you read the Heart Sutra, which yeah, I don't want to sound too airy-fairy about it, but it is interesting. It is poetry in the real sense. but poetry which at least gives a suggestion that it might be a compression of something quite interesting, but who knows what. So you've got this one, but I really like that. I think that'd be great if I could find a way of producing a book like that. You know, you can just give it to your kid when he's 7, and he reads the Heart Sutra and he thinks, oh, that's great. It has to be, you know, with cartoons next to it. And it wouldn't be the Heart Sutra, of course, it would be the sum total of modern human knowledge compressed down to 20 paragraphs. And it would have to be updated every year, of course. But you give it your kid, you know, and he reads this, and when he's a bit older and he can expand a bit, he moves up to the equivalent of the Diamond Sutra, which is a much longer book. It's not additional, it's not different stuff, it's just an expansion and a kind of opening out of what's already available, what's already known. And once they've done that and they're into adulthood,